She had learned, very early on, that the best way to survive in a room full of dangerous men was to make herself forgettable. Tessa Malone was good at that, exceptionally good. She wore cardigans in shades of grey and brown. She kept her honey blonde hair pinned back in a knot that her mother would have called sensible, and her college roommate had once called a cry for help. She carried a tote bag with a broken strap she'd been meaning to fix for 8 months. She ate lunch at her desk. She arrived 7 minutes early every morning and left exactly on time every evening, and in the 2 years, she'd worked as the night shift accountant for Harrow & Sons Consulting Group, which was not, in any legitimate sense of the word, a consulting group. Not one person in that building had learned the color of her eyes. Green, for the record. A deep, rain-soaked green that she'd inherited from her grandmother. Nobody had ever been close enough to notice. That was the point. The Harrow building sat on the edge of the financial district in Chicago, glass and steel and entirely unremarkable from the outside, which was also the point. The legitimate floors, 3rd through 7th, housed actual accountants, actual lawyers, actual people who filed actual taxes. The executive floor at the top was a different matter. Tessa had known that within her first week. You didn't need to be brilliant to figure it out. You just needed to pay attention, and Tessa had been paying attention her whole life. The men in hand-tailored suits who came up from the parking garage at odd hours, the deliveries that arrived in unmarked vans and were logged as consulting materials. The way every conversation stopped when she walked into the break room and resumed the moment she left with her tea and her head down, already invisible again. She knew what this place was. She needed the salary. It was as simple and as complicated as that. So she kept her head down. She reconciled the books with the kind of quiet precision that her supervisor, a nervous little man named Walsh, called honestly unsettling. She found discrepancies that other people missed and fixed them without being asked. She made herself useful, and she made herself small. 2 things she had always believed went hand in hand, and she told herself that this was fine, that this was smart, that the trick to survival was to be the grey cardigan in a room full of sharp edges. She had almost convinced herself. Then Adrian Croft walked into her life and ruined everything. She heard about him before she ever saw him. That was always how it worked with men like him. The stories arrived first, traveling ahead of him like a weather front. She heard his name in fragments in the pauses, between conversations she wasn't supposed to notice. She heard it in the way Walsh's hands shook on Thursday mornings after his standing call with the executive floor. She heard it in the careful, deliberate way the security team never, ever met each other's eyes when the black SUVs pulled into the garage. Adrian Croft, 41 years old, Chicago-born, 4th generation, head of the Croft Syndicate, which controlled port logistics from Milwaukee to Gary, 3 offshore holding companies, and approximately 40% of what moved through this city without documentation. He had testified before a federal grand jury twice and walked away both times. There were 7 men in the city who might reasonably be described as untouchable. Adrian Croft was not one of the 7. He was the reason the list existed. Tessa knew all of this the way she knew a lot of things. Carefully, quietly, and entirely to herself. Information was only dangerous if you let it show on your face. She had learned that, too. She first saw him on a Wednesday in October, at 11:43 at night, when she was the only person left on the 4th floor, and she had stayed late because the quarterly variance report had a 17-cent discrepancy she could not locate, and it was driving her quietly insane. She was on her 3rd cup of tea and her 2nd hour of hunting down a single misfiled transaction when the elevator opened. She didn't look up. People came and went at odd hours. That was not her business. "The light's on," said a voice, low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't ask questions so much as issue quiet observations as that other people scrambled to answer. "4th floor closes at 8, the voice continued. Tessa looked up. He was standing at the edge of the elevator bank, still half in shadow, two men flanking him at a respectful distance. Dark suit, no tie, collar open at the throat. He was taller than she'd pictured, with the kind of stillness that didn't read as calm so much as contained. Like something very powerful had simply decided, for now, not to move. He was looking directly at her. Most people looked through her. It was, at this point, a reflex she'd come to rely on. She sometimes thought she could walk through a room on fire, and people would only notice the smoke. Adrian Croft was not most people. "I'm sorry," she said, because it was always the safest first word. "I'll pack up." I didn't say leave. His gaze moved to the monitor in front of her, to the spreadsheet columns that covered 3 screens. "Quarterly variance?" She blinked. "Yes. Walsh sent me the preliminary last Friday. The numbers were wrong." "I know," she said. "I'm fixing it." Silence. He was still watching her, with an attention that felt almost clinical. "The way you'd study something you'd nearly dismissed that had just surprised you." "Tessa Malone," he said finally. Not a question. "Yes," she said. "Walsh says you're the best accountant in this building, and he's terrified of you." She felt a strange, traitorous flicker of something in her chest. "Walsh exaggerates." "Walsh is a coward," Croft said in the same unhurried tone he used for everything. "But he's occasionally accurate." He looked at her for another moment. Then, "Finish the report. Leave it on Walsh's desk." He turned and walked back toward the executive elevator. The 2 men followed without a word. The doors closed. Tessa sat very still for a full minute. Then she found the 17-cent discrepancy. A transposed digit in a routing number. Exactly where she'd suspected. And she finished the report. And she went home. And she did not think about the way Adrian Croft had said her name, like it was something he'd already known for a while. She did not think about it at all. She almost managed that, too. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday, it was always, somehow, a Tuesday, everything fell apart. She was covering the overnight shift because Danny Pruitt, who was supposed to be there, had called in sick for the 3rd time that month. She didn't mind. The building was quieter at night, and quiet suited her. She'd brought a thermos of chamomile tea and a mystery novel she was 2/3 through. For the half-hour she allowed herself at midnight, and she had settled into the particular peace of a building emptied of people when the door to the stairwell opened, and 2 men she didn't recognize walked in. Not through the main entrance, not through the elevator bank. Through the door that was supposed to require a keycard she was quite certain they didn't have. She kept her eyes on her screen. Her heart rate did not. She noted this with some distant part of her brain. Stay calm at all. She knew all the regulars. These were not regulars. "That her?" one of them said. The other one didn't answer. He was already moving. Tessa got approximately half a second to push back from her desk before the first man's hand closed around her upper arm. She was not a small woman. She had never been a small woman. And she had spent most of her life treating that fact with a complicated mixture of resignation and quiet grief, absorbing the way rooms adjusted around her and people's gazes slid past, and clothes were never quite the right shape, and the world was simply built for someone else. But in that moment, with a stranger's hand on her arm and her thermos of chamomile tea still steaming on the desk, she felt the full, furious inconvenience of her own body, and she drove her elbow back as hard as she could. She caught him in the ribs. He grunted. His grip loosened for exactly 1 second. She ran. She made it to the hallway. She made it almost to the main stairwell, which would have put her on the street in 40 seconds, which might have been enough. She didn't make it. The second man was faster than she expected, and when she went down hard, her shoulder taking the full impact against the tile floor. And the pain was bright and immediate, and her vision went grey at the edges in a way that was genuinely alarming. She heard her own breath, ragged and too loud. She heard the men talking, quickly and low. She heard one of them say something into a phone. And then she didn't hear anything at all. She woke to a headache and the smell of salt water. Not Chicago lake water. Actual salt. Industrial. Cold. The kind of smell that lived in old buildings near the water that had never quite dried out. She became aware, in pieces, of a concrete floor, a single overhead light. The sensation that her left shoulder was deeply unhappy with her, and the fact that her hands were zip-tied in front of her. She sat with this information for a moment. Then, because she was Tessa Malone and this was apparently her life now, she started cataloguing. Concrete room, roughly 20 by 30 feet. 2 doors, one heavy, one lighter, possibly a bathroom. 2 men, standing near the heavy door. Light source overhead, industrial. Her tote bag was on the floor across the room, which meant her phone was either in it or gone. No windows. The sound of water, distant but present. A warehouse, near the lake. She had been unconscious long enough that she couldn't be certain how far they'd traveled, but the salt smell suggested lakeshore. That was something. She was thinking about what else might be something when the heavy door opened and a third man came in, older than the other 2, grey at his temples, the kind of tan that came from a warmer climate, and eyes that were doing a very practiced imitation of nothing at all. "Miss Malone," he said, "I apologize for the manner of your arrival." She looked at him steadily. "I want to go home, I'm sure you do." He pulled up the one chair in the room and sat down across from her as if this were a meeting he'd scheduled. "We need to talk about some numbers." "I'm an accountant," she said. "I talk about numbers all the time." "The variance report," the man said. "The real one, not the version Walsh submitted." She felt something go very quiet inside her. She had found more than a 17-cent discrepancy that Wednesday night. She had found a pattern. A careful, patient pattern of small misdirections that, assembled correctly, pointed to a secondary set of books. She had fixed the surface errors and filed the report. She had not, because she was not an idiot, touched the pattern. She had not mentioned it to anyone. She had thought about it every day since. "I don't know what you mean," she said. The man across from her smiled. It was the kind of smile that had never once touched his eyes. "I think you do," he said. "I think that's the problem." The next few hours were not something she was going to file neatly in any report. There was no violence. They were too professional for that at first. But there was a very patient, very systematic pressure, and what it amounted to was this. Someone inside the Croft organization was redirecting money, had been for over a year. They believed, for reasons she couldn't fully pass, that she knew who. She didn't. She had found the pattern. She had not traced its origin. She told them that. They did not believe her. By the time the man with the grey temples ran out of patience, her shoulder had moved from unhappy to genuinely agonized, and the zip ties had cut into her wrists, and she had a cut above her left eyebrow from the moment in the second hour when the professional restraint had briefly slipped. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, when her phone rang inside her tote bag. All 3 men looked at it. One of them walked over and pulled it out, looked at the screen. Something passed between the 2 men at the door, not quite fear, but adjacent to it. "Who is it?" the man with grey temples said. The man with the phone didn't answer immediately. He turned it so his boss could see the screen. Even from across the room, Tessa could see the contact name, Croft. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then the grey-templed man said, very quietly, "Don't answer it." The phone rang out. Then, after a pause of maybe 30 seconds, it rang again, then it stopped. What followed was a conversation Tessa could only half hear, the 3 men moving to the far side of the room and speaking in low, urgent tones. What she could hear, in pieces, was enough. Someone had reported her absence. Walsh, maybe. The building's overnight security log, flagged automatically. Something, whatever it was, Adrian Croft was looking for her. She did not allow herself to feel the full weight of that. Not yet. She filed it instead, the way she filed everything, quietly, precisely, in a place she could access later. She was very carefully working her wrists against the zip tie. She had small hands, a fact she had always found inconvenient, and was currently revising her opinion of, when the door exploded inward, not metaphorically. It came off the upper hinge with a crack that she felt in her back teeth. What came through it was controlled chaos in an expensive suit. She recognized the man at the front by his silhouette, before she could see his face. That particular quality of stillness, the contained power of something that had decided to move. He was moving very fast. The two men at the door moved to intercept and were handled in a way that was brief and decisive, and she was not going to examine too closely. Adrian Croft came to a stop in the center of the room. His gaze swept the space, professional, methodical, and then it found her. She watched something happen in his face that she had no adequate category for. He crossed the room in 4 strides and crouched in front of her, and she had the peculiar, dissociated thought that his suit was going to get concrete dust on the knees. His hand came up and touched the cut above her eyebrow. Light, almost careful. "Who did this?" he said. It was not a question. His voice was the same as she remembered, low, unhurried, except that underneath it now there was something running very hot and very still. The way certain fires burned that way, without visible flame. "The man who just left through that door," she said. Grey hair, tan, approximately 55. His jaw tightened. He looked at one of the men behind him. A nod passed between them. Then he looked back at her, and something in his expression shifted. Something she couldn't name. Something that had no business being there on the face of a man like this, in a room like this, looking at a woman he'd spoken to exactly once in an elevator bank at midnight. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and then tried to, and discovered that her legs had a different opinion. He caught her before she got halfway up. His hands were careful, deliberate, like he was aware of the shoulder and working around it. "I've got you," he said quietly. She had spent 2 years making herself invisible in a building full of dangerous men. She had spent most of her life learning to take up as little space as possible, to fold herself down and make herself manageable, to preempt the discomfort that her body seemed to cause in other people, simply by existing the way it existed. Standing in the wreckage of a warehouse door with Adrian Croft's hands steady at her back, she could not, for one single moment, make herself feel invisible. It was the most alarming thing that had happened to her all night. And the night had included kidnapping. They took her to a building she didn't recognize, a private medical facility somewhere on the north side, clean and quiet and staffed by people who asked no questions. A doctor with kind eyes assessed her shoulder, bruised, not broken, which felt like the first thing that had gone right in hours, and cleaned the cut above her eyebrow and told her she'd be sore for a few days and ought to rest. She was sitting on an exam table with a bandage above her eye and an ice pack on her shoulder when the door opened and Croft came in. He'd shed the jacket. His sleeves were rolled back. He looked like a man who had accomplished several things in the past hour that he was not going to detail. And he carried 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, from somewhere, not a vending machine, and held one out to her. She took it. He sat down in the chair across from her. Not across the room, across from her, close enough that she was acutely aware of the smallness of the space. "The report," he said. "Which version?" A pause. "There are 2?" She looked at him steadily. "There was a secondary pattern in the 4th quarter data. Someone's been moving money through the variance columns for 14 months. Small amounts, consistent intervals. Whoever did it is good. I found it by accident." His expression didn't change. "And you didn't report it?" "I didn't know who I was reporting it to," she said. "That seemed relevant." Another pause, longer this time. He studied her with that same clinical attention she remembered from the first night. The look of a man who had nearly dismissed something and was reconsidering. "You're good," he said. "I know," she said, and then felt her face heat slightly, because she had never in her life said that sentence out loud. It felt reckless and strange and true. Something moved at the corner of his mouth, the barest suggestion of something that might, under other circumstances, be called a smile. "The numbers," he said. "Can you reconstruct the pattern? Document it?" "Yes. I'd need access to the full archive, not just the current quarter. And I'd need—" She stopped. "What?" "I'd need to know I wasn't going to be handed to anyone the moment I did." The silence that followed was absolute. "Tessa," he said. It was the first time he'd used just her name, not her full name, the way he'd used it that first night, with the particular precision of a man who did his homework. "Just her name, the way you said the name of someone you'd decided on." "Nobody," he said, "is going to touch you again." She looked at him. He looked back at her. The room was very quiet. She had spent 2 years in a building full of men who could not pick her out of a lineup. She had spent most of her adult life learning to be the grey cardigan, the sensible hairpin, the woman who arrived 7 minutes early and left exactly on time, and was never, ever the person anyone noticed. She believed him. She didn't know what to do with that. She filed it away, the way she filed everything, and she said, "I'll need a secure laptop and the full Q3 archive, and better coffee than this." He looked at the cup in her hand. "That's from the best place in the city," he said. "Then the best place in the city is overrated," she said. This time, the suggestion at the corner of his mouth became something definite, brief and real and startling on his face, like a crack of light under a door. "I'll find you better coffee," he said. She worked for 3 days in a suite, on the 42nd floor of a building she was not allowed to identify, with a secure laptop and the full archive, and, as promised, markedly better coffee. She also had access to an adjacent room with an actual bed, which she used in 4-hour increments, and a woman named Kit, who brought her meals without commentary and once, without being asked, brought her a cardigan, softer than anything she owned, in a deep teal that was nothing like the grey and brown she usually wore. She put it on. She didn't take it off for 2 days. She found everything. 14 months of careful, patient theft. Not random, targeted, and specific, and designed by someone who understood the books well enough to move inside them without touching the surface. Someone with access to both the primary accounts and the variance architecture. Someone who had known for over a year exactly where the gaps were and how long they'd hold. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, she sent Croft a single message through the secure channel they'd set up. Done. He was there in 11 minutes. She walked him through it on the screen. The pattern, the methodology, the origin point, the name that appeared, once she'd assembled all the pieces, with quiet and damning clarity. She watched his face as she talked. He was very still, the way he was always still, but there was something underneath it, a cold fury that never quite broke the surface. When she finished, she said, "You knew it was someone close." "I suspected," he said. "You didn't want to be right." He looked at her. "No, I didn't." A pause. She understood, suddenly and completely, what it cost a man like him to say that. She'd spent 2 years cataloguing the language of power in that building, all the careful ways men like this kept themselves sealed, and she understood the weight of those 3 words. "For what it's worth," she said, "they're very good. I only found it by accident. The 17 cents led me to the wrong column, and the wrong column led me to." She stopped. "I know that doesn't help. It helps to know," he said. "It always helps to know." He was still looking at her. She was very aware, again, of the specific quality of his attention. He had a way of looking at her that made it difficult to remember she was supposed to be invisible, as if the idea had simply never occurred to him, as if it would not have made any sense. "Where did you want to go?" he said. She blinked. "What? After this, Walsh's office. Consulting. Somewhere else." He paused. "The building isn't. It's not a safe place for you now. The people who took you know your face." She felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd known that. She'd been not thinking about it for 3 days, in the careful way she not thought about things she couldn't fix yet. "I'll figure something out," she said. "That's not an answer. It's the answer I have. Another pause. He turned toward the window, 42 floors up, the Chicago skyline catching the last of the afternoon light, the lake beyond it dark and endless. There's a position, he said carefully, in a private equity firm. Legitimate. Salary is good. The work is. Not unlike what you've been doing, but cleaner. She was quiet. It would require, he said, being available. To consult, occasionally, on other matters. Other matters, she repeated. Irregularities. Patterns. The kind of thing that requires someone who finds 17-cent discrepancies at midnight for personal satisfaction. She felt that strange, traitorous flicker again. That's a very specific job description. It's a very specific position. He turned from the window. His eyes, she had learned in 3 days, were dark grey, the colour of the lake in winter. I would prefer, he said, to know where you are. The room was very quiet. She thought about the grey cardigans, and the sensible hairpins, and the 7 minutes early, and the precise and meticulous project of making herself forgettable, of taking up as little space as possible, of moving through the world like something that had decided, long ago, not to leave a mark. She thought about a teal cardigan she hadn't taken off in 2 days. The coffee, she said. Would there be better coffee? I'll have it stocked, he said. No hesitation. And I set my own hours, within reason. My reason, she said, not yours. The corner of his mouth. Again. Your reason, he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. She was not a woman who made impulsive decisions. She was careful, methodical. The kind of person who found the error in the 14th month pattern, because she followed every thread to its end, even when the thread led somewhere inconvenient. This felt like a thread. She didn't know yet where it led. She thought about his hands at her back in the warehouse, careful and deliberate and working around the injury. She thought about I've got you, said quietly in a room full of wreckage, like a statement of fact. All right, she said. He nodded once. She had the sense that something had been decided. Something larger than the conversation they'd technically been having. Something neither of them was going to name yet in this room. At 42 floors, with the lake going dark outside and the teal cardigan still warm on her shoulders. She would name it later. She was good at finding things. Monday, he said. 8:15, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I arrive early, she said simply. He looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, the careful, contained, terrifyingly powerful man in the winter grey suit looked at Tessa Malone the way you looked at something that had surprised you so thoroughly and so completely that you had to take a breath before you could speak. He didn't speak. He just nodded and turned and walked to the door, and she sat in the quiet of the 42nd floor with her coffee going cold and the Chicago sky burning itself orange and gold outside the glass. And she felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, not invisible, not small, not forgettable, seen.